Hello to any parents or students listening to this session on how to revise. My name is Mrs. Howell and I'm the Assistant Principal for Teaching and Learning. This is the first in a series of walkthroughs on how to revise. Any student can watch and listen to these. They're helpful at any stage of school, and even better if you listen along with parents or carers. In today's session, we'll start by looking at the most important and simple revision technique, retrieval. All of the techniques we then look at in subsequent sessions will involve some form of retrieval. I'll also talk briefly about the science of memory so that you understand the benefits behind retrieval as a technique. All learning involves forgetting, and despite our inevitable frustration when we forget things, we actually need to embrace this as a natural part of learning. We can, however, disrupt the forgetting curve through repeatedly going back over prior learning after a gap. This is why, tempting as it may be, cramming before an exam does not work. You can see on the graph here, the more we go back over prior learning, the easier it becomes to remember. So that's why we should keep going over that useful, important information time and time again, even when it feels like we know it. So a little bit on the science of memory now. Working memory is a little bit like your school bag in the sense that it is limited and it can be overloaded. We keep our items of working memory readily available. We can access them easily here. But like I say, it is limited. Long-term memory, however, we can liken this to a bookshelf. You can store a lot more there. However, because there are more items, it takes more time to access them to find the specific item of knowledge that you're looking for. So the act of retrieval, which means trying to remember prior learning, is taking items from your long-term memory and moving them into working memory so that you can use them as and when you need them. Retrieval involves thinking hard. It's what we call cognitively active. All effective revision techniques are cognitively active. So if it feels hard, it's probably working. If you practice retrieval, you're more likely to remember information later, and you're also more likely to be able to use and apply the information in new situations, so such as in the exam hall when you need that particular item of knowledge. So what I'm showing you now is the retrieval continuum. So we can practice what's called cued recall. That means we might have certain words, phrases, maybe a sentence stem or a gap fill that helps prompt our memory and cue that particular information back into our working memory. But at the other end of the spectrum, you have free recall, and I'm going to show you an example of a free recall activity in a minute. Free recall will inevitably feel more difficult because there are no cues, but it is the most beneficial to long-term memory. However, the less confident we are, the more cued recall we should do to top up that knowledge and move along the retrieval continuum. So when you're getting near to an exam, hopefully you're at the point where you can do more free recall, but at the beginning of a scheme or topic of learning, that recall might need to be cued. And again, through this series of revision sessions, I will show you what I mean by cued and free recall. Okay, so here is a really simple example of free recall. Simply take a topic. So here I've got the example of organisms, and you write down everything you can remember. Set a timer. Keep the time fairly short, so I've suggested 5 minutes here. Write down anything you can remember, and then this part is really important. Check your notes against a trusted resource such as your exercise book or a textbook that accompanies a particular subject, something that has been provided by school, by your teacher, that links to the curriculum and the specification that you are studying. Make sure when you give yourself this corrective feedback afterwards that you highlight anything you forgot as an area to go back over. What this does is it makes sure that your revision is tailored to the gaps in your learning, and it also makes you really aware of what those gaps are. So pause this session now. Decide on a topic that you would like to revise, set a timer for 5 minutes, and have a go at a brain dump where we freely recall everything we can remember. When the time is up, make sure you give yourself that feedback and go over the bits that you struggled to remember and highlight them as an area to really work on in your next revision session. This second strategy is really just a structured way to do a brain dump where you organise the knowledge under headings or categories. You can see in this example on the respiratory system, the headings that have been used are blood, body and lungs, and then making further connections from there. It's a really great way to make links between the items of knowledge that you are retrieving. That's a really important part of your revision, making those connections. And a concept map is really useful for doing that. It could be an example of cued recall if you give yourselves those headings prior to doing a brain dump, or you could do your brain dump, your free recall first, and then organise the information under headings. We will have a subsequent session on graphic organisers. Concept map is one example of a graphic organiser that you can use as part of your revision. Really useful strategy. Finally, for this first session, retrieval cards. These are a great and very simple way to revise. Retrieval cards work by stating specific items of knowledge that are really important that you need to remember. You simply star the items that you know from memory and you write these down, retrieving the knowledge. For any you don't know, write a question mark and use trusted resources such as a textbook or a worksheet or your exercise book to look up the answers. Again, take a note of those that were more difficult to retrieve from memory. So any where you wrote a question mark, you know you need to go over those as part of further revision sessions. We have spoken in this session on the importance of corrective feedback, but it is absolutely crucial that with any of these strategies, you give yourself that feedback, paying attention to strengths and weaknesses. So what were the parts that you remembered more easily, that you still need to go over, but not pay as much attention and focus to as the parts that were difficult to remember? Those are the bits that you really need to highlight and make a focus of subsequent revision sessions. So you're really aware of where the gaps are in your learning. Remember that when you go back over that same information, it will feel easier. So if you think about that graph I showed you, the forgetting curve, the more repetitions, the more easily that information is going to come back into our working memory through repeated retrieval. I'm going to finish each of these sessions in the same way by going over the key principles of effective study and then some top tips. So remember, effective revision is active. If all you're doing is reading over something or highlighting with one eye on your phone perhaps, it will not be impactful and it's unlikely to stick in your long-term memory. Revision should feel hard, not impossible, but it should involve hard thinking. It should enable you to be aware of your own strengths and weaknesses, and each strategy we've looked at in this session has done that or should do that. It could be social. So this means you might discuss your revision. You might work with a study buddy. This can be very, very powerful because we know that talking about learning helps it to stay in long-term memory. So there will also be a session on ways to do this. But in the meantime, please do discuss your study sessions with your parents and carers and have a good conversation about what's gone well and get them to interact with you on that information that you are trying to learn and remember. Finally then, top tips on how to revise. Firstly, little and often is the best way to revise, not cramming. So even if it's just 5 or 10 minutes a day with the odd break day, then that is much more effective. Secondly, we've covered the importance of desirable difficulties. We've also covered the importance of revision being social at times, and we will go over these in more detail in subsequent sessions. Thirdly, revision well-being is very important. Stay hydrated, give yourself healthy snacks and a good sleep routine. Fresh air and natural light is also important. Also put technology, especially phones, to one side during a study session and make sure you stay focused. And we've talked about the importance of dialogue. I will go over strategies like Tell Me Three and the Feynman technique in the session that looks at revision as a social process. So good luck for now. I will speak to you again in the next session, and we will go over some other really, really key, useful, and very simple and even fun actually techniques on how to revise.